Coming up, maybe a big step forward for Florida and possibly a minor setback for Alabama. We'll tell you all about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. Good to have him back on the program today. Good to have all of you with us as well. We are busy today. A lot of spring games to recap from the past weekend. We'll look ahead to the final weekend of spring games in the SEC. This weekend, college football starts to feel a little closer here. You know, this is one of those major kind of tent poles that you have to kind of go around to get ready for the start of the season, and we're kind of on top of it here.
Yeah, it's good to be back in the chair. I tried my hand at horse race betting.
Oh, how'd that go, by the way?
Oh, my God. First of all, I lost a lot of money. Second of all, Lexington's awesome, and good for you Kentucky fans because they showed up in droves, and all they were talking about was the quarterback race up at Kentucky in the spring game and how everything went. So it was
Did
a good
you wear
time.
like some seersucker pants or anything like that?
I did. I wore a coat. I tried to look the part. I wore some boots and a coat and all that. But
did your significant other have like the big hat on and everything?
no,
Did you do that for Keeneland, or you only do that for the Kentucky Derby?
I guess so. I mean, there was a lot of people dressed up like that, but it went downhill quick. There was a lot of beverages flowing.
Michael's a degenerate gambler. Have you ever been to a horse race before? I'd love to
Exactly.
do that at
Stay
some
away
point
from
in
it,
time.
man.
Michael's
I'm
one of
telling
our
you.
producers
Stay away
off
from
camera. Anyway, let's dive in with the content here today. It's our big news around the SEC. It's our first and 10 here on SEC Country Live. Let me dive in with number one on the list today. A lot of spring games of the weekend. We'll cover them all before we're done. Let me start with Florida, though, because there was a lot of buzz kind of coming off this Florida game here. Big crowd in attendance. Mullen made a big push for crowd. Maybe didn't get quite as many as he hoped they might. I think he was pushing to break the record of 60-plus thousand. Did get more than 50,000 in attendance, and it sounds like everybody that was there had a lot of fun. And one of the things that you hear from Florida coach Dan Mullen is a desire to take the momentum that was established here this spring and take that with you into the rest of the summer and into the fall. Here is Dan Mullen, a happy Mullen, reacting to the orange and blue game.
I want to keep the energy going. You know, I forget, it was somebody the other day told me, you know, last year, I don't know that we cracked 90,000 in attendance last year. I was here for 4 years, and they also told me that we never were less than that. And so I want to get that back. You know, it's a combination. We're all in this together. You know, it's not just the guys on the field. It is the Gator Nation as a whole getting the program back to where it needs to be, and I want to make sure I thank everybody and let them know how important they are to make that happen.
It's funny, if you watch that Dan Mullen post-game press conference, how much of the time that was spent legitimately like the first 4 or 5 minutes of the entire discussion before you got into the day for Felipe Franks or really anything else, really that first 4 or 5 minutes almost all spent thanking fans, talking about the atmosphere. A word that gets used a lot by Mullen was fun, wanting to make Florida football fun again, making this really sort of this is not I mean this complimentary, not a criticism, almost making the whole thing into like a spectacle. You know what I'm saying? Come out and see Florida football. See how big this is going to try to be under Dan Mullen here. That was the kind of the push that Florida was going for. Did they accomplish what they set out to in your mind?
I think they definitely did. Now, whether that's good or bad is an opportunity to talk about something another day, but I think this was an extension of everything we've seen from Dan Mullen thus far this spring. I mean, you know what it felt like to me? Watching it on TV, I think they had 160 former players actually back on campus for this game. It had a Major League Baseball All-Star Game vibe to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there was like so many festivities going on, so many other storylines, it was like a Masters Par 3 contest. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a real game. There wasn't anything real flying around, but it had all the festivities that was kind of trying to get everybody amped back up. And I think he did just that. The numbers weren't in the 90,000s or anything like that, but I think Gators fans were feeling amped on Saturday.
Well, it's funny. We're getting a lot of comments coming in the comments section. Donnie Moore liked what he saw. He says, Mullen's coming for you, Georgia. That was obviously the message that Florida tried to put out there. Roderick Henderson referencing, there were a lot of celebrations. There was like a Duck Goose celebration. Yep. I guess they were allowing the kind of NFL-style choreographed celebrations there. Some people having fun about that. But here's an interesting comment from Greg Steele, who's a big Florida fan. What Greg says, the orange and blue game was a joke. The defense laid down. And the whole game was about fun and games and not improving. I will say that it is a little bit weird that they did make the whole thing more about, or I shouldn't say the whole thing, but so much of this was about, quote, picking teams. Right. And to me, the picking teams always seemed like a shell game to put the kind of defense on the field that gave points a chance to be scored and get folks excited. Maybe that's a good idea because Florida fans obviously want offense, I think more than the average SEC fan base does. They want to see fun and gun. They want to see a lot of points scored. this is a Florida fan saying this now. Greg Steele comments every day. He's a Florida fan. Do you agree with the Florida fan here that maybe this was done at the expense of the defense too much for Saturday?
There was a little bit of that to me because there was. And first of all, let's go ahead and cross this bridge because I had a problem with this. Felipe Franks rushed for 63 yards. One of them was on a 60-yard attempt. I don't know if y'all watched it. He was tagged down like 10 yards after he crossed the line of scrimmage. I mean, come on. And Dan Mullen's like, just let him go, And then he punts the ball into the crowd, and they do all this. That guy was down a long time ago. That or his knees are taken out from under him, and he's probably getting, on a stretcher taken off the field. So I'll cross that bridge with you because I feel like Dan Mullen did look. But how many times have we talked about this? Dan Mullen's an offensive coach.
Yeah.
That's what Dan Mullen wants to see. He wants the fun. He wants
Yeah.
the ball being spread around. He wants everybody kind of up and down. And that's the way. That's the feeling. That's the vibe Dan Mullen brings this. And I'm not trying to come down too hard on Dan Mullen. The bottom line is this. As much as we talk about Saban disciples and Kirby Smart and Jeremy Pruitt and Will Muschamp and Nick Saban, Dan Mullen does it a different way. He's an Urban Meyer guy. He does it to a different. So I'm not saying he's wrong. It's just not like anybody else usually we see inside the SEC. And he wanted to have fun. And we've had a couple of commenters say in the comment section, just happy to see him having fun again.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what Florida needs.
Daniel Grohl says there were more than 53,000 people there. That's just what was counted at the beginning. I myself was running late, and more cars were parked around the time I was walking in. I'd say there was at least 60,000 or more there. That's a Florida fan reporting from actually having been in the swamp on Saturday. And along the lines of what Daniel's saying, it's kind of funny. In Mullen's post-game press conference, he was ribbing with one of the reporters. I don't know which reporter it was. I think it may have been Pat Dooley, saying that they didn't inflate the number, that apparently Dooley had joked leading up to the Orange and Blue game that Florida always inflates its attendance number. Mullen made a point of saying during the press conference, pointing to the reporters saying, and we didn't inflate the number either. So this was, to say Daniel Grohl's deal here of that 53,000 maybe have been an underestimate of how many people were there. It does sound like Mullen was a little bit careful of not wanting to give themselves too much credit, that he wanted this to be like a legitimate showing of what Florida was. And by the way, 60,000 was the record. That's what they were going to push for. The fact that he allowed the number to sort of come in underneath 60,000 does lend some legitimacy to that it really was at least that many people there, which is a huge showing compared to what we've seen around most of college football so far this spring.
I agree. I love that from Dan Mullen because, listen, he's right. This is not being inflated. And Dan Mullen's a guy that, listen, he's been out, walking the streets in Gainesville trying to get everybody and their brother to come to the spring game, trying to get everybody amped back up. But in the end, he did kind of downplay it and say, this is where we're at. This is what we're doing. We had a ton of guys there. We had a lot of fun. We loved the fans that showed out. And he made a point of being like, hey, we are very appreciative of what happened Saturday.
RJ Drummond says Florida's going to win 9 games this season. I don't know how much of that's based on what was seen in the spring game or what's been seen so far this spring or just sort of a general thought. I am still a long way away from saying that Florida's going to be in that sort of 8-9 win category. This for me is still a team that's going to be lucky to win its 6th or 7th game, and I can't give you 8 or 9, but I'm also willing to hear the argument on the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, where I sit with it. I've been right at 8 or 9 wins for Florida ever since we started talking about it, and I just think the first string's there. You had a couple guys show with it. And by the way, I talked about Felipe Franks running. I thought he looked pretty good. I thought Kyle Trask actually looked incredibly accurate at times. I thought both quarterbacks still have a lot of room to improve. But I wasn't, I didn't take a win or two away from them from the quarterback play the other day. I actually thought Emory Jones looked better, and I thought he would as well. So I think the talent's there. I love what you're getting out of the running back competition right now. Those transfer wide receivers, if they become eligible, both the guy from Ohio State and Van Jefferson from Ole Miss, let me tell you right now, that becomes an incredibly talented offense.
On Facebook, G. Tompkins says, Dan Mullen better not trot Felipe Franks out on opening day. I mean, that to me was one of the big takeaways from the spring is that Felipe Franks is the quarterback.
Yeah, I don't take that away. I think that Kyle Trask has got to be the guy. I think that when you look at what they both bring, I think there's a lot of upside there. But things, to me, when Kyle Trask was in the game, they flowed smoother. He didn't try to show off any mobility the way Felipe Franks did. I mean, Felipe Franks rushed for 2 touchdowns if you go by the grade sheet. But Kyle Trask looked like he was in command. And I think that's saying a lot for a guy that's never really been a starter at any level.
Rick Keene says on Facebook, I was really impressed with how Felipe Franks ran. We're going to talk more about that later on the show. Kyle Trask, Rick says, really showed off his accuracy, but I agree with what other commenters have said. I wish we could have seen more of what can be done. I mean, some SEC teams are really adamant about playing that sort of like best on best, number ones against number ones. Florida did something very, very different from that. Is different better or worse in this case?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I understand what they were trying to do. And like I said, that's a thing where if you have the depth to do it, a lot of teams would love to do that. But when you come out and do it that way, and I believe Texas A&M did the same thing, where you kind of pick teams and it's kind of a mismatch. It was hard for me to really tell who was starting at different offensive line spots and who was really getting the bulk of the playing opportunity. But I think it worked for them because that was the vibe of the entire spring game. It was just, hey, this is an exercise and fun. This is something we're going to go out there and try to play well. But this isn't really a scrimmage 1-versus-1 type of thing for them.
Hardwired to Self-Destruction over on YouTube says that Kyle Trask going to be the better game manager, which at a certain point in time this season, maybe Florida needs that. By the way, our buddy Cliff Nelson says, what's up, guys? Checking in from the dentist office. Hope everyone had a good weekend. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Go Tigers. So we appreciate Cliff checking in, even though I guess he's getting some dental work done there. That's true SEC Country Live commitment to checking at the dentist's office.
Yeah.
It's not like you were checking in on your day off on Thursday.
No, thanks, Cliff, for joining us and everybody. Honestly, it is kind of crazy. We do get a lot of you guys from a lot of different places. So, listen, to go back to our topic a minute ago, Justin White says, look at the schedule. It's an easy one. I say 8 wins. That's kind of where I'm coming from for all this 8 and 9 win talk when I look at Florida. I don't think it's so much that the product's going to be there under Dan Mullen year one to really compete for national titles, say, or SEC titles. But I think the schedule is easy enough to navigate for them to where I think they could get back to 8 or 9 win plateau and still not be at their best.
All right, let's do item number 2 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Some interesting developments with the Alabama quarterback race, both in terms of one thing that may be bad news, one thing that may be good news. Let me start with the bad here, or at least what was not great news. We don't really know how serious it's going to be as of yet. But Nick Saban letting us know that that injured thumb that's been a problem for Tua Tagovailoa for most of the spring, it is still a problem. And maybe here in the last little bit, getting a little bit worse. Here is what Saban said over the weekend.
You know, Tua had a little setback yesterday with his hand. So, you know, the doctors are trying to evaluate the best course of action and what we do with him the remainder of the spring. And with that said, I can't really tell you any more, you know, about he didn't take any snaps today. He did take a lot of snaps yesterday. So, you know, we're going to try to protect this and make sure that this thing is not going to be an issue for him in the fall.
The thing that Nick Saban's referencing there is the injured thumb, initially reported as a sprained thumb, then changed to a broken thumb, and apparently, as Saban describes it, a bit of a setback. Mike, you were telling me that Tua Tagovailoa on his Instagram feed here has kind of updated here. That is the thumb and a cast there. What do I take away from Tua in this cast?
There's
here?
2 things I noticed. First of all, he says post, which to me means after procedure. Also, look, I think he's sitting in a wheelchair.
Oh, so here's how dumb I am. I thought the word post meant that this was his Instagram post.
No.
That's dumb.
That's gold. Yeah. No, listen. That mistake could be made very easily.
Yeah.
Thanks, BA. You know,
Like, hey y'all, I'm doing a post.
40 going on 60 for BA.
I guess
the
so.
Instagram post. But yeah, I think he's sitting there. It looks like to me like he's just had a surgery done.
Birmingham, Alabama, to obviously make you think about Dr.
Right.
James Andrews.
Yeah, it looks like he's getting wheeled out of the hospital possibly. And so I think going in, you know, Saban says it on Saturday. Listen, we're going to try to figure out the best course of action for Tua moving forward. And I guess that course of action involves some kind of surgery today.
Sam Spunkmeyer says, man, you're old, BA. Here's the thing. I know that all Instagram posts don't have the word post across like a watermark. Yeah. I do know that, but in this particular case, I thought that's what the post might mean. I don't know what all these captions mean.
Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty funny. That's so bad. yeah, I guess he was just making his Instagram post right there.
I know this is total speculation, but Saban says that this was a setback, which the word setback would have you believe that this was an unplanned medical procedure. It's a setback, we had to do this. But going to Dr. James Andrews almost makes it seem like this is something they knew they're going to have to do eventually. Is this a planned thing that Saban doesn't want to talk about, or is this an unplanned thing that has sort of like erupted here for Tua?
I think this was an unplanned thing. To me, if they knew they were going to have a procedure, I'm sure that Nick Saban was thinking, hey, we'll get that done after A-Day. Because usually when you have to have any kind of surgery, especially on fingers and thumbs and hand ligaments and all that kind of thing, you get it done right away. That way you have as much time as possible to kind of build up to these things, get the swelling down, do whatever you have to do. This, to me, signals that was an unplanned incident. Maybe he had some, I don't know if he hit it on something or maybe something didn't heal the way they thought it would last week.
Teresa Stewart says, that's okay, BA. My daughter gives me a hard time about technology, too. Thanks for having my back, Teresa. The truth is, I do have an Instagram account. I actually have a Snapchat account, too.
Oh, yeah.
I have never published anything to any of them.
Yeah, listen, I have a Snapchat account, too. I don't even think I have the app anymore. I can't figure that stuff out.
Yes.
So I'm giving you a hard time.
So
but
I'm actually
okay.
active on these, or I should say I have active accounts. I'm not active on them, but yeah, I appreciate that. Ryan Wright says that Jalen Hurts is the man, and apparently Nick Saban kind of agrees with you as well, because while Tua Tagovailoa is dealing with an injury, that's more opportunity for Jalen Hurts. Not just opportunity for him to practice, but also more opportunity for him to be evaluated here as well. And Saban, when he spoke to the media, offered a pretty favorable evaluation of what Jalen Hurts has been able to do thus far this spring. Here it is.
Jalen has done, I think, had a really good spring from the standpoint that, we've really tried to focus on continuing to help him, develop confidence in the passing game. And he has shown signs of being able to do that, and we want to continue to work on that. But he has done, a really good job. I think sometimes, you can't just think about making plays. You have to sort of make plays based on how they're designed, and have some faith, trust, and confidence that in the people that are playing with you. That if you go through your progression, that's going to give us the best chance to be able to make some explosive plays in the passing game. And when it breaks down, then you use your athletic ability to try to make up for it. So, but I think he's done much better at that this spring.
David Sandlin in the comments section on Facebook says, I think Jalen Hurts is going to surprise everyone this year in the throwing game. But based on what we just heard from Nick Saban right there, it doesn't really seem like a surprise at all. Almost exactly what you would expect to hear Saban describing is exactly what it does describe. A guy that is having to force himself to just sort of plant his feet and kind of go through the progressions, let the play do what it's supposed to do. This is one of those weird moments when elite athleticism, and I believe that Jalen Hurts has that, elite athleticism almost become a bad thing because you've got it at your disposal. Therefore, you're always sort of looking to play that card as opposed to allowing the play to do what it's supposed to do, but trusting the offense is going to yield more productivity over the long haul.
Yeah, and to me, and listen, I think Nick Saban's trying to tell the truth. I think he's trying to do the best of his, the best of what he can do with this situation. But I'm taking that during the spring with a grain of salt. I really am. I know that Nick Saban sees on film, you have a quarterback sitting in the pocket, he's going through his reads, he's doing all the right things right now. But guess what? Quarterback's not live in spring. Jalen Hurts is not going to be able to take off and run and get 40 yards. He's going to be tagged down. The play's going to be blown dead. So, of course, Jalen Hurts is sitting in the pocket right now. Now, I do take Nick Saban at his word that he's probably seen more confidence out of Hurt. Get back there, sit in the pocket, and let that thing rip. But I'm going to have to see it more in live action before I actually believe that he's making those reads down the field.
Dustin Goodwin calls him Tua Thumbo Vailoa. Are we going to allow that?
Yeah, I'm not.
I think I'm okay with that.
I like the attempt. I don't know.
Listen, you got to realize there is an inverse relationship between people who don't understand Instagram and like puns. Yeah. Like the less likely you are to understand Instagram, the more likely you are to appreciate a good pun. And Thumbo Vailoa is a pun that I can sort of appreciate. I'm going to kind of go with that.
Thumbo, yeah, that's fine with me.
But your point there, and by the way, Kevin Chapman says Jalen Hurts is going to start the first game and the second game. If they win big, then expect him to start until he struggles. I kind of agree with at least part of what Kevin's saying there. I think that this is a disingenuous attempt on Nick Saban's part to sort of, cast Jalen Hurts as equal to Tua Tagovailoa. I don't believe that's true, but I do believe this is what Nick Saban's going to try to do because I don't think he wants Jalen Hurts to transfer here. I do expect Jalen Hurts to be the starter against Louisville. They know they can beat Louisville no matter who plays quarterback. Mac Jones can start a quarterback. They can still beat Louisville. So that they know they're fine in that game. So better to sort of set up a scenario where, hey, Tua misses some practice time. Jalen gets ahead of him. We're going to let Jalen be the guy right now. I mean, after all, we've seen Cooper Bateman start games early in September before.
Blake
Barnett. We've seen all kinds of strange stuff like that take place. This is what Saban's going to do, but I'm going to call the entire ploy disingenuous.
Yeah, listen, Beaumont Ellery says, update on Bama. A great quarterback is going to play, and that's kind of the direction I go with it, too. The question for me is not who starts against Louisville. The question for me is who starts by the time you get to LSU, by the time you get to Auburn, by the time you get to those games, Mississippi State later on in the schedule that really can decide your season. That's the big question for me. It's not who comes out against Louisville or who comes out against, the first 3 games that are non-conference opponents. That's not what I'm worried about because I guarantee you they're both going to play. They're both going to play a ton of snaps. It's about who really gets the coaches really fired up about going late into the season.
Bobby J. Smith says that Hurts is a college quarterback. He's not switching positions. I kind of agree with that there as well. Now, do I think that Jalen Hurts is going to play in the NFL as a quarterback? I don't. Do I think he can play in the NFL? I do. So you can make a case, well, it behooves him to switch positions then so he can start learning what he's going to try to do in the NFL. the truth is that's not best for Alabama. You want to be deep at every position. Hurts moving to a position at wide receiver, which I believe Alabama's already deep at, only makes you weak at quarterback because you do not want to have Mac Jones, who's never, I don't think ever played a snap. You do not want that guy as your backup quarterback primary to Tua Tagovailoa. That is not the recipe for a national championship.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I actually disagree with you to a point where I don't think Jalen Hurts is an NFL player right now. I don't know what position we can talk about him. I mean, I understand that he's a dynamic open field runner as a quarterback, but I don't know how you get him the ball in the NFL and allow him the space that he's had at quarterback in college football. And he has a lot of work to do, and so that's what he's setting out doing right now. And he has to take the opportunity with Tua being on the shelf to say, listen, and Mac Jones is the same way. These guys are getting a ton of reps at the A-Day game coming up because Tua's not on the field. They need to take the opportunity and run with it.
All right, let me hit YouTube here real quick before we get ready to move on. Actually, we'll check back on YouTube here in just a moment. Actually, G. Gray says Jalen Hurts will not be the starter no matter what. Whenever Tua returns, he's going to start. So obviously, and she's got an Alabama. G. Grace has an Alabama logo next to the name there. So obviously, this Tua Hurts debate, even among Alabama fans, is one that's going on here.
Yeah, this continues to be the storyline for a lot of people watching these Alabama practices. And here's what I'll say about this. This is what I've been telling everybody. The first snap against Louisville is not going to be the end of this scenario. You know what I mean? Like, we can talk about who's going to start the season, who's the number one quarterback, who's going to come out of fall camp. It's not going to end in the first 5 minutes against Louisville. It's not going to end in the first 3 games. This is something that's going to be continued to carry on because we've shown Nick Saban has the ability to pull one guy in the middle of a big game. And so that thing's going to continue. I think if Tua comes out and struggle in any one game, you'd see Jalen go back in and vice versa. So this is not something we're going to see the end of in spring camp or in fall camp.
All right, let's move on to item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We got something from Kirby Smart over the weekend that maybe the most similar to Nick Saban, sort of the media style blow up. You got the fist pounding on the table. You got some real chastising of reporters, a real Saban style escapade on the part of Kirby Smart here. We'll give you a chance to hear that, but let me try to set this up here for a moment. Georgia has a pretty, at least by recruiting standards, pretty elite crop of tight ends. You've got Charlie Warner, who is a very high 4-star prospect, also a UGA legacy. You've got Isaac Nada, who is a very rare 5-star tight end. Only been a couple of those in the SEC in recent years. O.J. Howard was at Alabama. Isaac Nada is here at Georgia. But these tight ends at Georgia haven't really been used a ton over the last couple of years. Not since Kirby Smart's taken the job, but now the Georgia offensive coordinator, Jim Chaney, is also the tight ends coach. So when Isaac Nada met with the media last week, he was asked, does the presence of the OC in your tight end meetings mean maybe a few more catches for the tight ends? Here was Isaac Nada's response to that.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously this team's different than what we had last year. We had 2 of the best rushers in SEC history and Georgia history. So, like I said, it's just a different team. Those guys are going to get the ball because they're super talented, and it's just the way it was. And I improved as a blocker, so you can look at it one of 2 ways. I didn't get as many balls, but I think I had a better year overall actually than I did my freshman year, as far as growth, as far as blocking. So, to some other people, it might have been like, hey, he didn't have as many, he wasn't as productive. But for me, I know I got better as a player. So, that's the way I've looked at it. And this year, obviously, I want to improve on what I did last year, and catching the ball and making plays is one of those areas.
So, offensive coordinator is the tight ends coach. Nada says that's more catches for us, the tight ends. Kirby Smart spoke to the media on Saturday. The media said, hey, we've been hearing that maybe the presence of the offensive coordinator means more catches to the tight ends. Kirby, what do you say about that? And then Kirby kind of goes off. Here's the coach of the Dogs.
I am so tired of the tight end questions. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if they've called it more or less. The end line for me is, how many points do we score? To me, when they chart you on offense, they say, how many points do you score? So if they give us like 14 points for Isaac Nada to catch a touchdown, we'll start throwing it to him more. All right, if we get 21 points for Charlie to catch one, I promise you we'll design a play to get a 21-point play. But right now we're just trying to score points, and if that includes tight ends, that's great. Do I think our tight ends have caught more balls this spring? Probably so, because we've thrown the ball more this spring than we have in the past. But tight ends have to be a matchup disaster. Charlie had a big catch today. Isaac Nada had a big catch today. So I don't know if they're being targeted more or if they're getting open more. But a lot of it has to do with what that GPS number is, which is how fast they're running.
A lot of beating on the table there, a lot of I'm tired of the question, a little sarcasm with the 14-point play, the 21-point play. Is the transformation into a true Saban-style coach now complete with Kirby Smart? We've now gotten the emphatic fist on the table arguments there. Has it now officially taken place there?
It definitely has, because this comes at me the angle of this is a defensive coach. He's like, listen, I don't draw the plays. I don't have the reception chart. I don't know what they're doing. I know they're just throwing to the open guy. They're just throwing the open guy, the open playmaker. They're getting the ball in the hands of people that can get in the end zone, and I don't care who it is. It's like, that is a typical, like, Nick Saban-style defensive coach response, coming straight from, like, a Bill Belichick coaching tree. He's like, listen, we get it to the open guy. We do what the defense takes us. We spread the ball around. Whoever's open gets the ball, and they score in the touchdown. That's all we care about.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, Brandon Walker, who's running our SEC Country official account today, says, Mike, you got to focus on the show and quit typing. I tried to explain this on Thursday. It's like, everybody's trying to give you credit because you pay more attention to the YouTube comment section than I do, and they're like, oh, Mike's better at multitasking than I am. If y'all people only realize how many different tasks I'm trying to accomplish over the course of the show, that all Mike sit here and does is just chat back and forth with people typing.
I'm trying to talk to our people. I'm trying to talk, just like Cliff's at the dentist office right now. I'm trying to talk to our people and make sure we can get our vibe put.
All right, let me be serious about the Georgia thing for a moment, because why is it that, and Alabama's sort of guilty of this too, when you've got great tight ends, and O.J. Howard's going to play in the NFL, I think that Werner and Nauta and Georgia may both play in the NFL. Why don't these teams throw the tight end? I mean, Arkansas seemed to find a way to get its tight ends involved. Yeah. Hurst over at South Carolina, he's like 9 feet tall. He's 400 pounds. He was catching balls left and right. Why are some of these teams so much better at getting tight ends involved than others, including Georgia here, who has got just a laundry list of elite players, or seemingly elite players?
It's tough because, listen, I think a lot of times when you come out in the offensive sets that Georgia and Alabama are going to, they're going to have the tight end attached to the offensive line. They're going to be up there double teaming. It's harder to get a release on some of these guys. Now, when you go to what you've seen, with these spread offenses, and you have guys lining up out wide, you're going to see these guys get easier releases. The ball's going to get in their hand a little bit more. And I think there's a way to do both. Actually, I think Jimbo Fisher did a great job of doing that Saturday in Texas A&M spring game. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But the tight end can still be used. O.J. Howard shows up in the national title game for Alabama. All of a sudden, he's going for like 170 yards in a national title game. So it's there. They just got to do a better job playing and play out and getting it to them.
Speaking of Georgia, India Anderson's upset with me in the Facebook comment section. India says that I was a couple weeks ago pounding it down our throats, meaning the audience, that Georgia was ranked #1 in recruiting. Now they're not. He's staying far away from that topic. Funny. The truth is, I don't know that I was ever pounding it down anybody's throat that Georgia's ranked #1. However, I also believe that when the recruiting cycle is done for 2019, Georgia's going to be back at #1 again. It's not going to be Ole Miss. Now, in fairness, we talked about the Owen Pepo situation last week in the show. If Pepo, who's now moved that's a 5-star linebacker from Georgia, going to choose between Auburn and UGA. I said this on the show last week, that if he chooses Auburn over Georgia, there's plenty of online discussion that he might. I said that's not a good situation for Georgia. Now, come December, I think Pepo may be back where he's supposed to be. But nonetheless, I have said that if they lose the 5-star linebacker at the beginning of May, that's not great for Georgia. But there's very little concern, I think, on the part of anybody at Georgia that despite the fact they're only ranked, I think, #3 right now, they won't be ranked, 1 or 2, probably 1 by the end of 2019 cycle.
I tend to agree. Now, I don't know that it's a slam dunk that Georgia just finishes #1. I think that's BA stepping out on the Georgia thing right there. But I do think that it's going to be a long time until we see Georgia drop off, past like that #5 mark. I don't think that's coming anytime soon. And here's why. Look at where the recruits are this next year. And I saw this number the other day, and you guys obviously are going to correct me, but there's like, maybe 40 ESPN 300 recruits coming out of the state of Georgia right now.
Yeah,
like it's
really
something insane. And
really
so
high.
they've got it right for their picking in the backyard. They're going to get their guys, and they're going to be at or near the top of that ranking list when it comes out next.
We were talking about tight end usage. Dwayne Rourke, who's an Arkansas fan, says right now Arkansas's got the #1 tight end in the country for the 2019 class. Hope we get him. That is one of those positions at a school like Arkansas, even though it's a transition to a new coach from Brett Bielema over to a Chad Morris, you'd like to think Arkansas can keep that heritage alive, because when it comes to like the Hunter Henrys of the world, I mean, Arkansas has had good tight ends, and they have found a way to use them.
Yeah, they have. And I'm gonna go back to Texas A&M, and obviously we're not going to get to the spring game until in the second half of the show, but Sternberger, I think his name is. You want to see a tight end go out and play. Look at what Jimbo.
Name for tight end.
Look at what Jimbo Fisher did with that guy this weekend. He looked absolutely incredible. I know people are excited to have him on campus down there at Texas A&M, but it's almost a blueprint now for a guy that's coming out of the backfield, making plays, going over the top, using your size. You just don't see that combination in the SEC that often anymore.
I mean, isn't it a great name for a tight end?
Sternberger. Yeah, definitely.
The rest of y'all are eating sissy sandwiches. Texas A&M's eating Sternbergers. Sternbergers.
Yeah,
I should also correct myself. The SEC country official account are reminding us that I said that Hayden Hurst is 9 feet tall and 400 pounds. He's neither of those dimensions. But you watch Hayden Hurst in person, this is the biggest tight end you've ever seen. He's just wide open all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's very little surprise why Hurst is like seemingly leaping up a lot of these draft boards right now. I mean, he is a haul to deal with, or was a haul to deal with for South Carolina.
No, I agree. I think the fact, what is he, 27, something like that?
Is he that old?
Played
Yeah.
baseball first before he got to South Carolina, but he understands how to deal with this kind of process. I think he's going to be a great NFL tight end. You see all these guys, and they always come out of programs like this, don't they? Like Stanford, like Michigan's always got tight ends. Like they come out of these like too tight, guys that are running all these blocking offenses. I think that's why you see Arkansas and teams like that usually in the mix.
Indy Anderson does respond, says, by the way, Georgia's now ranked number 5 in the 24/7 Sports Composite Team ranking. Here's all I'm going to tell you. Look at Georgia's number of commits compared to the number of commits with other teams in the top 5.
Average.
You got to look at the average score per player. Georgia's still doing just fine there. Let's do item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and a plot twist that I wasn't necessarily expecting for the LSU quarterback situation. All of a sudden, maybe a big step up here for Llewellyn Narcisse. I had all but sort of anointed Miles Brennan as the LSU starting quarterback, but after this weekend, it sounds like Narcisse may be still trying to be a competitor here. We know he's the more dual threat of the options here, and probably I don't want to say more talented. I'm trying to think what the word I'm looking for is. Maybe bringing a skill set to the table that's maybe a little bit more advanced than what Justin McMillan brings to the table. It sounds like Llewellyn Narcisse had a pretty good day. Here is LSU coach Ed Orgeron throwing another quarterback's hat into that competitive ring here.
He played several snaps with the first team, did very well. Llewellyn stood out today. Made a lot of good throws, a lot of good plays. He had some scrambles with some big passes. But he's improved every day.
Yeah, so that's Llewellyn Narcisse getting some praise there from Ed Orgeron. I find that to be pretty interesting because, as I said, I'd pretty much given this thing a lock to Miles Brennan. Now, LSU's like a lot of these other schools. You can say what you want about what happens behind closed doors. You're going to put this on display during your spring game on Saturday. Do you expect to see Narcisse potentially match what Miles Brennan does or outplay what Miles Brennan does in that game?
I don't expect him to surpass him in quarterback play. I don't. But here's what I'll say. When I listened to this reminded me a lot of what Nick Saban said 2 years ago in the spring at Alabama about Jalen Hurts. It was Jalen Hurts showed up early, and he was always that third-string guy or that second-string guy, and it was always Cooper Bateman and Blake Barnett really dueling it out. Hey, who's going to be the starter? And Jalen Hurts just kind of sitting in the background. And then all of a sudden, when you got to the season and you realized your offensive line was struggling a little bit early, you realize Jalen Hurts and a guy like Llewellyn Narcisse can actually bring more to your offense than maybe the guy that's sitting back in the pocket letting it rip. Maybe if this offensive line doesn't come to fruition as much as they're hoping at LSU, you turn to a guy like Llewellyn Narcisse, because what I see right now is him really separating himself from McMillan. It seems like it's becoming a two-horse race between Miles Brennan and Llewellyn Narcisse. If he can just stick at or near the top, not necessarily has to be better with his arm, but if he can stay near Miles Brennan, I could easily see him taking a ton of snaps, maybe even being the starter and kind of splitting reps with Miles Brennan.
Matt Goodwin says all what Orgeron just said there tells us is LSU still doesn't have a quarterback. That's nothing new. I don't know. I mean, I've been skeptical of this process the entire time, but I wish we had this audio. I'd play it for you. We've played it on the show before. The description of Llewellyn Narcisse is having the strongest arm of the three. Stronger arm than Brennan, stronger arm than McMillan. Maybe not as accurate as Brennan, but when the strongest arm of the three is also maybe the most athletic, if you can get him ready to go, that's your guy.
Exactly.
I mean, now the question is, can he really sort of do the other things that quarterbacks have to do? The reading of the defenses, the understanding of his own playbook. But if the biggest arm is also the most athletic of the trio, then that should be your quarterback.
I completely agree with you, and that's kind of what I'm alluding to when I say, listen, this quarterback competition is all fun. Who can go through their progressions? Who can get the ball downfield? Who can drop dimes in 7-on-7? But when the real bullets start flying in the fall, and all of a sudden you realize Miles Brennan is not quite as good with his feet as Llewellyn Narcisse is, and Llewellyn Narcisse can start to kind of, that output, that offensive output, he can start to slide things in his favor. I'm just telling you right now, watch out for the guy. I know that we got off on a tangent maybe a week or two ago, looked at the numbers and said Miles Brennan's ahead by a mile, but it's a different dynamic once those live bullets start flying.
Glenn Coleman says, and this is an important point. Now, Glenn's point of view is that Lowell Narcisse is going to take over the starting quarterback job against Miami. That's the Week 1 game. He says bank on this. Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't, but there's no reason why. Look, I'm actually going to contradict what I've said before, but maybe there isn't a reason why you couldn't sort of take this competition into the season if you have to, because they are so different. Brennan is the drop back passer. He's the, I don't want to say game manager, but he's going to be in the game because of his accuracy and his decision making. Narcisse is going to be the dynamic guy. Maybe he throws a big ball with the big arm. Maybe he runs around and sort of breaks free and gets loose. I mean, maybe they're different enough that you're not hurting yourself if you play them both. Now, that makes Ed Orgeron a bit of a backtracker on him saying this is the year we find our quarterback. Having two isn't the same thing as finding the guy that can be your quarterback. But maybe Brennan and Narcisse are different enough that you can play them both.
Well, I don't even know if I'm pegging Ed Orgeron right and saying we've got our quarterback. He just said our quarterback's in that room. Maybe he meant two guys kind of sandwiched together and all of a sudden that equals a good quarterback. But here's what I will say about the competition, and I think you bring up a good point. I think a couple people in the comment section bring up a good point. This is not Bama facing off against Louisville in game number 1 with a 28-point spread. This is an LSU team that's going to play a pretty good Miami team and might even be underdogs in that opening game. So they're a little bit more under the pressure to kind of find a guy and maybe start to go with him through fall camp. I'm not saying they won't play both guys, and they probably will play both guys in the opener if both guys are good enough. But it's not like you have that comfort of being like, hey, we're heavily favored and we should win this game either way.
Let me hop on YouTube here for a moment. Tyler Mann, who's an LSU fan, says, hey, whatever works. If he can come in and put up big numbers, I don't care if he throws it with his big toe. In other words, he'll take whatever quarterback can get. Shannon Burgess agrees with that, saying, yeah, just make plays, period. Don't care who it is, just make plays and win. Esteban Esteves, though, a little bit more pointed with his viewpoint here. He says, I honestly, this is a big LSU fan speaking, have all my eggs in the Lowell Narcisse basket. I want him to win the job, but I'm still cheering with whoever becomes the starter there. But that's a pretty interesting statement for an LSU fan to make in our YouTube comment section that, you know, it's a battle between the two. At one point in time, it looked like Miles Brennan may be the favorite, but that's a guy outright rooting for Lowell Narcisse. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, and I think that I don't want to talk for him, but I think this is an LSU fan base that understands that, listen, a guy that's mobile is just something that they probably haven't had recently. You know what I mean? There's been a lot of statuesque quarterbacks out there. So have a guy that's mobile and can move around. It maybe gives another dimension to an offense that's been stuck in the past a lot.
Katie McCarty says the fact is LSU still needs to find a go-to running back, quarterback, and number 1 wide receiver. That's a lot to do. On the running back thing is, and I'm going to butcher this name, I never pronounce it quite right. Is it Edwards Hilaire, the backup,
Yep.
or one of those guys competing for that starting job? It also sounds like, based on what Orgeron said this week,
Yes.
that Edwards Hilaire took a step forward a bit there too.
Yeah, I think that's big news because we've talked about how many times this offseason, how many question marks are around this LSU team on offense. I mean, question marks all along the offensive line, a huge question mark at quarterback. You've got a ton of talented receivers, but who's going to step up being the guy? And this is a running back-driven school and football team, and it sounds like Clyde. Now I don't know if Ed Orgeron's blowing smoke, but it does sound like, in my opinion, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is starting to take a little bit of a lead in that running back exchange. Now you're going to see some other things start to play out. I think there's been talk of a graduate transfer possibly coming in, but we saw that a little bit a year ago in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think he has all the weapons you need, just had not yet pieced it together. I know a lot of our LSU commenters have been bringing up his name a lot in the past year. Maybe this is a guy who's taken that spring stride to maybe be the guy next fall.
Christy Hardy in the comment section says, well, who's going to be the starting quarterback against Miami? You know, I would have said last week it's definitely going to be Miles Brennan for sure. I'm going to take Orgeron at face value right here and say, as of now, I don't know who it is. I'm going to move my, if you have like the big board or something like that where we have our, I had my name next to Miles Brennan as the starting quarterback for LSU. I got to move my check back into the undecided category here.
Okay. Well,
I'm going to move my check back into the undecided category here.
I'm not ready to make my move just yet. I'm not going to take my little magnetic strip off and put it on the
some
other
of that
side.
cable news style stuff where like you're manipulating the smart boards. We need to start doing some of that kind of stuff.
I'm not going to do it just yet because I think that when you look at how this LSU team is built, you can talk all you want to about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The wide receiver core to me is going to be the base of the offense. So if it takes Miles Brennan to get the ball out to these wide receivers, I'm still on board with him. Now, I could change my opinion in the coming weeks or sometime in the fall, but for right now, I'm still with Miles Brennan.
All right, item number 5 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. Marcus Spears spoke to SEC Country. That's the SEC network analyst on TV, and he had some pointed thoughts about a few SEC teams, one of which Mississippi State, who Spears thinks can be, believe it or not, a big-time contender in the SEC West this season. Interesting quote here from Spears. Let me read it to you. He says, believe it or not, in the West, the challenge at Alabama, he says he thinks it's Mississippi State. with them, it's experience. Number one, a lot of stuff. Obviously, I'm taking off of last year, and they pushed Alabama to the brink last year with Fitzgerald. And I think you've got to have that type of guy in order to challenge Alabama. As we've seen so many times before, I think a lot of the hype around Mississippi State is warranted. So that is Marcus Spears throwing his hat into the ring of first-year coach Joe Moorhead maybe being the number one competitor to Alabama in the SEC West. You buying that?
Yeah, this one's a tough one for me because obviously the talk's always going to be with Auburn. We've talked about how good LSU is. But Mississippi State's going to be up there. I don't know. I would really buy into this if Dan Mullen was back at Mississippi State. I'd say, man, they really have a chance to really put the pressure on. I don't know what you're getting with Moorhead yet. I'm not sure what he brings as a head coach and what exactly his philosophies and everything else will gel at Mississippi State. I don't know. But when you look at the talent they do have coming back, when you look on that defensive line with Jeffrey Simmons and some of the other guys, Sweat, when you look at the linebacking core, they have the opportunity in the secondary to be very good. Arius Williams, Nick Fitzgerald, the offensive line returns 4 starters. They have the opportunity to really make a ton of noise. And right now, you're looking at a team that beat LSU by 30 last year. You're looking at a team that almost knocked off Alabama at some point last year. And so I don't know if I'm ready to make that leap to where they're the runner-up for me in the SEC West, but they are not far off for me. I think they're going to be a very good football team.
But they almost beat an Alabama team playing Jalen Hurts at quarterback. I think if Tua Tagovailoa played in that game, they would have won the game by 2 touchdowns. And yes, they blew at LSU, but they lost to Auburn by, 39 points. I mean, you can say, well, Auburn doesn't have Kerryon Johnson anymore, and Auburn doesn't have Jeff Holland anymore. You're going to have to come up with a lot of personnel losses for Auburn to make up the 39-point deficit that separated these two teams a year ago. The game will be in Starkville this year as opposed to playing in Jordan-Hare Stadium last year. But to say that somehow Mississippi State's now better than Auburn when Auburn just blew them out a season ago, that's tough for me to buy.
Well, it's tough because Gus Malzahn's back and Jared Stidham's back. Yeah. But that's why I can't give him the stamp yet of Joe Moorhead and saying, boy, this is going to be a good team. I just think all the makings are there. I think the defense are running. And by the way, for me, second place is not just about Auburn versus Mississippi State. Texas A&M is lined back there a little bit too, and I really like what they had going on Saturday. But just talking about those two teams head up, I'm still stuck on the losses they have. I mean, I still see what exactly they were as a football team last year. They were Jeff Hollins coming off the edge. They were locked down at corner with the guy they got going into the draft. They did have a good offensive line. They did have good running backs. And all those guys are gone now. And so I know it's easy to piece together and say Auburn, for everything you say about Gus Malzahn, usually they come in and they make a lot of noise. Mississippi State could have that first-year fire in them to get back to that spot.
A couple comments here. Sam Spunkmeyer says, I can see Mississippi State battling for runner-up in the West with LSU and Auburn, but I can't take them overtaking Alabama. I can't take that leap as of yet. Also, Jermaine Tucker likes what he hears. He throws out a Hail State. Bo Molinari says, I can't agree with Marcus Spears. I believe the Aggies are going to be on the rise, so I have to have others moving down. Mississippi State, can Mississippi State beat Jimbo Fisher's team? That's a fair question. The thing I agree with from Bo's comment there is if somebody's moving up, somebody has to move down. There's not room for everybody to kind of be in that upper tier. And if A&M's on the rise, that may take more than 1 year to happen. That's more of a 2019 story for me. But Bo is right. If somebody's moving up, somebody's got to move down. The first-year coach Joe Moorhead Mississippi State team seems like a candidate for that.
Yeah, he could be. I just think that, listen, I'm not that high on LSU in the year. I'm not really that high on Auburn, so that leaves me with Texas A&M and Mississippi State trying to make up ground. And I see all those 4 teams kind of sitting about the same, maybe with LSU lagging a little bit because there's more questions that I'm comfortable with down there right now. But Mississippi State's schedule, and we talked about this with Florida a little bit earlier, Mississippi State's schedule, in my opinion, is manageable as far as Mississippi State goes. They're gonna have to go to Alabama, but they've got Auburn at home, they've got Florida at home, they've got Texas A&M at home, they've got Arkansas at home, and they have Ole Miss at Vaught-Hemingway. And so when you look at that, they've got to find a way to beat LSU down in Baton Rouge, but it's manageable, in my opinion, that they can get a lot of those things done.
Ken Sagini, who is a Florida fan, by the way, says in the Facebook comment section that Mississippi State had 4 wide receivers out versus Alabama last year. That always fails to get mentioned. That's a good point, Ken. I obviously didn't reference that. And didn't even remember that being true. So that's a good point that you bring up there. But as far as the brand new coach, Mississippi State, is Joe Moorhead. Big get for our More Cowbell, the SEC Country Mississippi State podcast, which you hear daily with Brandon Walker, a buddy who's sat in for Mike on Thursday. He actually this morning had Mississippi State coach Joe Moorhead on the show, and Moorhead gave a preview to Mississippi State fans exactly what they can see from their team, which holds its spring game this upcoming weekend. Here's Moorhead on that subject.
They're going to see a very talented roster. They're going to see a coaching staff that's going to put them in position to be successful with our schemes and our motivation. and a program that's committed to the execution of the fine details. And I think that's going to be part of the thing that elevates us from good to great.
Interesting line there at the end, the idea of going from good to great. That's obviously a reference to a popular business book, but for Mississippi State, that's something that can also be a pretty applicable phrase here. They have been good. A lot of wins last year for the combination of Dan Mullen and Nick Fitzgerald, and now Joe Moorhead says, I want to take you from where you were, which was good, to being great here. And if they're going to contend with Alabama in the SEC West, that for me is the definition of a great team.
I agree, and I think what's interesting for Mississippi State fans when they look at Joe Moorhead is, I think the opportunity is there, but I'm just not ready to slam dunk this thing. It's like, we had, 18 or 19 of 22 starters coming back off last year's football team. But think of where you were before Dan Mullen and understand the fact that Dan Mullen might be the best coach in Mississippi State history, right? With the heights he got and the length of time he was there, he did some incredible things. So I'm not ready to go back in and say, boy, Moorhead's the guy for the long term. He can get it done this year and slide back. I think they have the opportunity. That's why I'm not ready to commit to it. I'm being non-committal about this, but it's because I don't know anything about Moorhead just yet.
Jermaine Tucker is a Mississippi State fan. He says, y'all are sleeping on us, Hail State. We'll see how that goes. Let's do item number 6 here in our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. Another spring game this weekend, and another big crowd was the one put forth by Texas A&M, and seemingly a pretty good showing for the Aggies here also, who are trying to turn a corner a bit in Jimbo Fisher's first year. And speaking of Jimbo Fisher, in terms of getting involved in the spring game, he wanted to let fans know at the outset that, hey, he's not coaching this game. He called himself, well, he sort of thinks of himself as the spring game commissioner. Here's Jimbo Fisher.
I'm the commissioner. I ain't the coach. You can't blame this on me. I ain't coaching either team. I'm the commissioner. I sit back. I'm like Goodell. Now, you can boo me like Goodell.
So kind of a funny line there from Jimbo Fisher that he wasn't going to be criticized for the coaching in this game, but overall, I think if you're A&M, you also put on a pretty good show here. You had kind of a nice big crowd here. There's clearly some enthusiasm for Fisher there at Texas A&M, and I think he's got a couple quarterbacks he can work with here.
I think he does. I think what you saw out of Nick Starkel and Kellen Mond was kind of an inability to want to make dangerous throws, I guess is what I'm talking about. It seemed like they had a better control of the offense because they weren't throwing into traffic. They weren't just throwing these things up to these wide receivers. They were allowing them to get the ball in front of them and run with it. And I was not only impressed with the offense, I was impressed with both sides of the ball really in Texas A&M. I was impressed with the crowd. I was impressed with the product that Jimbo Fisher has been able to get on the field in such a short period of time. I think that Texas A&M, so far with the games we've seen, I think Texas A&M has been my favorite spring game to watch.
Oh, that's an interesting statement. Jared Seegers has a great comment. He says, Jimbo got that commission money. Roger Bell has a huge salary. I guess Jimbo Fisher kind of is in the same tax bracket there now. Bo Molinari, who's obviously a big Texas A&M fan on our Facebook comment section, says, I love what Jimbo Fisher is doing in Aggie land, bringing back toughness, a wrecking crew-style defense, emphasis on the tight end position, quarterbacks with experience. Osmond can stretch the field. That's reference to the wide receiver. And obviously the offensive line is really strong there. It is a much different brand of football than what Kevin Sumlin was playing. Sumlin probably was too finesse for my taste. And Jimbo Fisher is a step in the better, more right direction for Texas A&M. I think you'd probably agree with that.
I think that he's brought a toughness to this defense and this offensive line. I felt like in the trenches they were hitting each other in the mouth. What's this guy's name? Dalen Mack. Let me make sure I get that guy's name out there. This guy looked incredible playing the defensive line for Texas A&M this past weekend in that spring game. Better than a lot of people I've seen. Now, they have talent, and they've had the talent up front. But when you look at this guy and what they were able to do up front, they were smacking face masks like I haven't seen Texas A&M do in quite some time. And I think Jimbo Fisher did a good job. We've talked about what offense do you run. Kevin Sumlin had this wide-out style to where you're going to bring it back in. I think he did a good job really kind of merging the way he thinks about offense to what his players have known in past years and kind of meshing them together.
Dwayne Rourke, who's an Arkansas fan, makes a good point about Texas A&M. That Jimbo Fisher voice works really well in Aggie land. He sounds like a Texas A&M coach.
He's speaking fast, and he's got some twang, and he's mowing through it, and he's getting the questions out, he's getting the answers out, and I agree with you. It's merged really well.
Item number 7, tough moment here for a former Alabama player, Rueben Foster, now with the San Francisco 49ers, gets sort of tangled up in some legal trouble here, stemming from an alleged domestic violence situation. Nick Saban tried to head this issue off at the Bend, speaking about it on Saturday, essentially saying there's not a whole lot he can say right now. Here is Saban on the now embattled former Tide player, Rueben Foster.
Look, we hate it very much when any player that we had here who did a great job for us at Alabama, great job in terms of how he represented the university, how he represented our program, the contribution he made to the program. And obviously, we have a player that you'll probably ask me about and that has legal issues Rueben Foster, and I don't think I'm in a position to comment because I don't know the details and the facts. And, you know, one of the things that we try to teach our players here, there's consequences for, you know, good and bad behavior, but we're going to remain supportive and try to help our player every way that we can. So, you know, we don't condone this kind of behavior, but and certainly would not like to see any of our players have these kind of issues or the victims to suffer any at all.
Now, while Saban doesn't say that in his quote, the reason why and that wasn't his opening statement, by the way, this wasn't in reference to a question. He says this essentially right off the get-go in the press conference this weekend. The reason why he probably did say that is because of some pretty pointed criticism he got from an NFL analyst named Ross Tucker. Tucker tweeted this, that Rueben Foster's been kicked out of the combine, failed a drug test, and arrested twice since going pro, but never got in trouble at Alabama. Bama either has the best support system of all time or does a great job keeping things quiet, or both. That's Ross Tucker hitting Alabama pretty hard here over this Rueben Foster situation. What's your take on that?
I honestly think that Tucker, without meaning to, kind of compliments Nick Saban in a way. I always feel this way because I do think it's a cop-out. Nick Saban can't hold everybody's hand. You know, they're 50 years old out there doing things, and everybody's going to be looking, well, that guy played at Alabama under Nick Saban. You just can't hold guys' hands. They have to be accountable for themselves once they get, you know, out of this program and into the league. And you've seen this with a couple of guys, and Rolando McClain's another one that kind of goes along the same way. What could have been to what was not, and some talented players. But is Nick Saban supposed to apologize for really keeping these guys on the right track in college? I don't think so. I think he's done a great job of making everybody understand what's going on, what the brackets need to be, where their focus needs to be at Alabama. He can't hold their hand past that and go into the NFL with them and say, listen, make sure you don't do this, make sure you don't do that. Now, I don't condone whatever Rueben Foster did, and obviously I feel bad for that entire situation. But Nick Saban's not at fault here. Nick Saban has put a set of standards around the Alabama football team that almost everybody at Alabama has adhered to, save for a couple of other people. And so I don't know where the blame really lies for the situation.
Roderick Henderson says Nick Saban's got that tight leash. But the truth is, I'm not so sure how true that is, and I'm not so sure that this kind of criticism doesn't stick to Alabama, maybe a little bit more than, you know, some of the Alabama fans in our comment section want to believe, because in addition to the kind of stuff where you say, well, Rueben Foster never got in trouble at Alabama, but Alabama was also willing to take on Jonathan Taylor, the sort of ousted defensive lineman at Georgia who had gotten in trouble for a domestic violence situation, got charged with a felony while at Georgia, went to Alabama, and then allegedly got in trouble again. There was the issue in Louisiana not too long ago where the player was found with both weed and a gun in his car, and somehow that all just sort of disappeared and everything seemed to go away. There seems to be a pattern here of both leniency and secrecy when it comes to some of these Alabama discipline issues. So I don't know that Ross Tucker is actually giving Alabama a compliment. I think what Ross Tucker is trying to do is sort of a wink, wink, nod, nod way of saying this is almost too convenient that a guy who might get in trouble in high school then gets in trouble in the NFL, but somehow for 3 to 4 years, a coach who has explained why he's lenient on discipline in the past, all of a sudden you don't get in trouble there at Alabama. I mean, doesn't that criticism stick a little bit?
I just don't think so. I mean, I really don't. I'm trying not to be a homer on this, and here's where I'll meet you on this. Nick Saban, in a lot of ways, in my opinion, has to quit sticking himself to some of these players that are already out of the program. You remember after Rueben Foster, all that stuff at the Combine, Nick Saban came out and said, listen, let's hear all the facts.
Yeah.
Rueben Foster is a guy that did very well for our program. We stand behind him. But here's what I'll say about this, and here's why some of these things come up in the NFL later that Nick Saban just couldn't have seen coming. First of all, you know what? At Alabama, you're going through spring practice. You're going through mat drills. You're going through winter conditioning. You're doing all those things. You're waking up at 6 a.m. to go to the weight room. You're not going to the club. You're not going out to LA. You're not being seen in Vegas. You're not hitting the tables. Second of all, these guys have a lot more money. These guys have a lot more money to do a lot more things right now with a lot more downtime. And so maybe their personalities are coming out later, but I don't know if Nick Saban should apologize for that. Nick Saban's getting these guys to the best of their ability and making sure they're staying on track to graduate from college and get to the NFL. That's all he can promise them. He can't take it any farther.
Over on the Facebook comment section, Jared Seeger says that Nick Saban's a coach that believes in second chances. I believe that to be true, and I think that second chance is probably a pretty good idea, probably a good sort of, I believe in second chance as well. I think you should give
By the way,
players—
I mean, the Jonathan Taylor kid did get kicked off Alabama's team later on. It's like Nick Saban didn't try to cover that up once it happened. Now, he did try to give him a second chance, but once all the stuff came down, he did get rid of him and say, listen, you've had your second
But
chance.
I mean, the people that know the Jonathan Taylor story will tell you that's a pretty ugly situation to give that guy a second chance.
It is, but I'm just saying, to Nick Saban's credit, he didn't sweep that under the rug when it's happened again. He was like, listen, you got to leave the program now. You messed up.
All right, item number 8 here on our SEC Country Life First and 10 list. This is sort of well-traveled ground for us now, but it's kind of funny how this keeps coming up. And I think it keeps coming up in a way that could be problems for Tennessee. Tommy Tuberville is a former SEC coach at 2 different places, Ole Miss and Auburn. He was on the radio station WJOX in Birmingham last week, and he was talking about the impact that athletic director Philip Fulmer and head coach Jeremy Pruitt could have at Tennessee. And listen to the phrase that Tuberville uses to describe Jeremy Pruitt. I sort of think of this as problematic. Let me read it to you here. He says, I think the combination of Philip Fulmer being athletic director and Jeremy Pruitt being the head coach and training, so to speak, is a huge boost for the Tennessee football program. Every school in the conference has to have an edge up, and I think that's the edge up for Tennessee. When they hired Philip Fulmer, he knows how to win in the conference. Fulmer brought a young coach in who has never been a head coach. It's going to take him a while, but Philip's going to mentor him. He's going to teach him the ins and outs of Tennessee, the ins and outs of SEC football. If Pruitt's going to listen to him, I think Tennessee's going to be a very good football team in 3 or 4 years. It's going to take a while. That's Tommy Tuberville on WJOX. I think it's a huge alarm bell that Tommy Tuberville calls Jeremy Pruitt a head coach in training. Almost makes it seem like he needs training wheels or like, bumper, on a bowling alley. It's like you got to give this guy a lot of protection, a lot of safety. That he's got to listen to his daddy, Philip Fulmer, in order to know how to navigate these waters. This comes across really, I think, problematic for Tennessee.
Yeah, listen, you know how I feel about Tommy Tuberville. I don't have a lot of love lost for the guy, but you're right. I mean, the way these comments roll off his tongue, Philip Fulmer knows how to win the SEC. Philip Fulmer knew how to win in the 1998 SEC. Philip Fulmer doesn't know how to win in the 2018 SEC. It's a completely different trajectory that you need. And guess what? He's not the head coach in waiting. He's the head coach. And so get over it. Let's get over the fact that Jeremy Pruitt hasn't coached, because he is the head coach at the University of Tennessee, and Philip Fulmer needs to stay out of his way.
Yeah, I mean, Will Muschamp didn't deal with that kind of head coach and training vibe at Florida. Kirby Smart didn't deal with that at Georgia. You hire the guy, he's the head coach now. And as you said, the late 90s, when Tennessee was winning under Philip Fulmer, the landscape totally different. Clemson's a recruiting power now that it was not. That's a lot of those same players that Clemson and Tennessee are having to fight for. Georgia's closing its borders now in a way that it did not exist in the 90s. It is tougher for Tennessee now than it used to be. And I'm not so sure what Philip Fulmer knows with the current landscape, given the fact he's been out of coaching for a while now, and it was by choice that Tennessee removed him.
This to me, I mean, just like I said, I don't really love Tommy Tuberville. So listening to this comment from Tommy Tuberville, it's almost like he looks over at Philip Fulmer, who got fired right around the same time he did, and was like, boy, I'd love to be in that guy's spot. It's us old guys. We know how to win in the SEC. We can still carry this league. Make sure Philip Fulmer still has a ton of power over Jeremy Pruitt, the little head coach in waiting.
Dan Riggin says Tuberville's way too old school. He's not a good game commentator either. Well, I'll let that criticism stand on its own there. But in terms of being too old school, I guess it's not a surprise here that given the sort of young, brash, up-and-coming coach, or the old guard guy that Tuberville coached with and against in the same league at the same time, part of the same fraternity, it's probably not a surprise that he's siding with Fulmer here over the young upstart.
It's kind of what I mean. I mean, it does feel like that Tommy Tuberville sees a lot of himself in Philip Fulmer, guys that were one-time successful at universities and got removed from their position. So I think he looks into it like a little bit of a mirror. I hate this vibe surrounding this Tennessee program right now, and I'm telling you right now, Philip Fulmer hasn't done anything yet. We've said that a few times in the show. But you've got to quit getting that feeling out there. Like, I hope Philip Fulmer doesn't feel the way that Tommy Tuberville does.
Katie McCarty in the YouTube comment section says Philip Fulmer thinks Instagram is a breakfast meal replacement, which I think is a really funny line and really a good example of how things have changed a lot since his day and now. I'm not quite so sure what he can tell Jeremy Pruitt. I don't think that Jeremy Pruitt would appreciate at all being described as a head coach in training. It makes him sound like a child more so than the guy that's been picked to lead the Tennessee program there. Let's do item number 9 on our SEC Country Live First and 10. Let's go back to the topic we started the show with, and that's the Florida spring game. Interesting debate on that a little earlier, but how about the player that probably took this sort of center stage, maybe more so than anybody else during the game, Felipe Franks. You kind of remarked before that he was given a chance to run during the game. Some of these runs may be a little bit suspicious in that maybe he should have been whistled down. He wasn't. But how about actually running during real games this season when instead of being tagged, you'll be tackled? Is this something that Felipe Franks is ready and willing to do? He talked to Brady Ackerman and the official Florida side about that very subject. I thought this quote was kind of interesting. Listen to this.
Whatever they ask me to do, I'm willing to do that just to help the team. I'm trying to win a championship just like everybody else around here. So whatever's asked for me to do, I'm going to do that, whether it be running, whether it be throwing the ball vertical, intermediate passes, short passes, anything like that, just to get our guys the ball in their hands and, let them work.
So obviously the word championship is going to get some attention there from Felipe Franks, saying that's what he's here to do. I wouldn't expect a player to sort of think anything less than that when it comes to that opportunity. But how about as an actual runner during the season? Is this something that Felipe Franks is going to be able to do for Florida?
I don't think so. Listen, Dan Mullen came out and said as much he said, listen, I don't need a dynamic playmaker at quarterback. What I need is a guy who's willing to take what the defense gives you. So if the defense is closing down too hard on your running game, all you have to do is show it one time on film that you're willing to pull the ball and that you can get the first down. And all of a sudden, that's on every highlight tape for your offense moving forward for the rest of the year. They're saying, listen, this guy can scramble for the first down. When it comes to 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, you got to watch for the quarterback pulling the ball at the backside. That's all he really needs to make the offense really work from a quarterback position standpoint. And so I think Felipe Franks can do it. I think he showed a little bit of mobility. It's like I said, those numbers were completely inflated when you really break it down and watch it. But Dan Mullen, he doesn't need Kadarius Toney at quarterback right now. He needs a guy that can throw the ball as well. Now, can you find a balance and put Kyle Trask in there as well? I think you can. I don't think Felipe Franks has really an uptick as far as his legs go over Kyle Trask. I think you just have to have a guy that's a little bit mobile, and most of the guys on their staff are like that.
In our comment section, Marquise Hudson says, Felipe Franks is going to play the first 5 games, then it's going to be Emory Jones' job. Could you see Emory as the quarterback by the second half of the season, or does he have too far to go to get to that point?
I think he's got too far to go, and I think he's got one too many people in front of him right now. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not Felipe Franks, then you're going to go to Kyle Trask, and it's hard for me to believe they're going to move through 3 quarterbacks in Dan Mullen's first year to get all the way down to Emory Jones in the last third of the season, because like I've mentioned before, I see Florida being pretty good this year. I think they could have a lot on the table there in the last half of the season.
Rick Keene says, look, if Franks can run and learn his progressions, we'll be a team to contend for championships. With the way Scarlett was thinking and the way the line was blocking, I think he has a chance. Here's my thing about the Florida offense, though. Don't you have to call it for what – if Frank's your quarterback, you got to call plays for what he does well, not for what Dan Mullen wants to do 10 years from now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And listen, I think that once they decide on a quarterback, then you zone it in and say, what are we dynamic at? What are we not very good at? You kind of design the game plan around him. But I think that's going to take some time, and I don't think they're going to know who the guy is.
All right, funny Champion of Life video coming up here in a moment. Before that, item number 10 on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. Sort of an interesting display from the other 2 SEC teams that had spring games this weekend. You said you were with some folks in Lexington. I want to hear from you what they had to say about that. Missouri also holds its spring game. I don't know if you saw it. Apparently not very many people saw it inside the stadium either. Here was a picture from a reporter on Twitter of what just looks to be just about an empty stadium. That's a bad look.
Yeah, I mean, weather was affecting a lot of things this weekend, all over the sporting landscape, but there's really not any 2 ways to slice that. That's a pretty bad
If I had my choice, I'd kick Missouri out of the SEC.
Yeah, no, you
I'd
would.
Just throw them out.
I hope no
like a
Missouri
drunk in a
fans are
bar.
watching right now.
Just toss them out the window.
Yeah, Kentucky
That's
actually
not
did,
SEC.
Kentucky
I don't
did their
care how
game on
cold
Friday
it is.
night. Yeah, listen, I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just saying that it's like the weather has played a really big impact on a lot of the games around the SEC. You've had like half and half.
What were the Kentucky fans saying about their situation?
Kentucky fans were talking a lot about that quarterback competition. I think it's Wilson that a lot of the guys, right? When I say these Kentucky fans are talking, I mean like I'm at Keeneland, in between betting and gambling on these horses, and I'm in the bathroom and I'm hearing people yell back and forth. What do you think of that quarterback competition?
Well, there you go.
So they're talking about it a lot. I think the Kentucky fans are amped up this year.
Well, there you go. We'll look forward to seeing that Kentucky quarterback situation play out later on this fall. Here on SEC Country Live, though, we always look to close the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of live. Guys and gals who are doing funny, interesting things in the world of sports and beyond. And today, how about the brave souls that in NASCAR make sure that the cars stay fueled up during the race? You know, putting themselves in harm's way and just shaking it off. Take a look at this action from, is this from Bristol, do you know?
Yeah, this is from Bristol Saturday.
This is from the Xfinity race on Saturday. Look at that pit crew guy who gets caught on fire. Like, he's actually in flames right now. And is just totally chill about the whole deal here, saying, hey, I got a little fire on my foot. Yeah. Can you get it off? Are the suits really that flame retardant?
I don't think so. Like, my thing is, like, is this thing not shooting up his shoelaces into his leg right now? And he is so chill about that. He's a big fella. He's like, listen, you got to get that for me, bro.
Yeah, that is really something there. Brave soul, braver than me. All right, thanks for being with us on the program today. Make sure you check out the audio version of our show. We'll have the podcast posted for you in the various podcast channels as soon as we're done. And then share the show with your friends on both Facebook and YouTube. Let them know we're talking about the SEC here every afternoon on SEC Country Live. And we'll see you again tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of SEC Country Live.